Chapter 8. Release Planning. The purpose of the release plan is to give the Scrum team a reasonable forecast of the number of features, scope, that are likely to be delivered within a specific time frame. The time frame may be of less importance if the release is scope-driven, as explained below. The release plan focuses the whole Scrum team on the end game and vision of the product owner. This usually spurs on a highly motivated development team and brings any issues to the surface as early as possible. It is important to understand that although release planning is commonly used on projects and was advocated in the original Scrum Guide, it is not essential for all Scrum projects. In my opinion, for software projects, a release plan is nearly always worth doing since it binds the whole team and provides forecast for the whole organization. Setting a release goal. Though not a requirement of Scrum, as a principle, I recommend starting every release with a release goal. This is a brief, high-level description of the features in a product release. An example of a release goal would be: the Acme Sports site is a sports website with stats for football, rugby, golf, tennis, and F1. The site also should contain Twitter updates from the top celebrities in each sport. Notice that this has not gone into excruciating detail of the specific features in the backlog, but is enough of an overview to create a vision that the whole team can comprehend and ask questions about. I recommend a few sentences or bullet points to keep it short and sweet. This goal can be used to determine a minimum acceptable feature set for launch when necessary. Scope-driven versus date-driven release. A release plan is usually either scope-driven or date-driven. The key drivers for a date-driven release are usually marketing factors such as a sporting event, peak shopping season, or national holiday. The chosen date is usually related to a source of revenue for the business. The key driver for a scope-driven release is a specific set of valuable features. For example, an F1 game may be of little value to the user without driver selection, circuit selection, race sequences, and dynamic circuit map. However, it may be of little revenue for the business without some advertising built into the software. Therefore, the in-game features plus advertising may be defined as a minimum scope for an acceptable release and deemed more important than any date. Once the team is fully resourced, it is obvious that the more features we add, the longer the product is likely to take to release. Similarly, the closer we bring the date, the less features we are likely to build before launch. For this common sense reason, either the date or scope can be fixed, but not both. This is to say that a project should be either date-driven or scope-driven. It is also important to realize that attempting to add features or bring forward the date without updating the plan is likely to reduce the quality of the product, since we end up trying to achieve the impossible and cause the same last-minute scramble that Scrum was designed to avoid. This is often something that a Scrum Master needs to communicate to stakeholders and a product owner, if not already understood. In any case, a release plan allows sensible planning on a sprint-by-sprint basis. So long as the plan is followed, the project should be plain sailing. Prioritize items for release. In order to plan a release, the product owner should have a prioritized backlog. The benefit of prioritization is realized in release planning and sprint planning. If the most important features are at the top of the backlog, then the business is more likely to have a successful product release by the release date. Logically speaking, as soon as you develop your most important features, then you're in a better position for an ROI point of view. This relates to the old 80-20 rule, Pareto's principle. It states that 20% of the work we do delivers 80% of the value. This is a very important rule because in backlog terms it means that the top percentage of a prioritized backlog is likely to deliver the vast majority of the product value. This alone shows why early prioritization is key to a successful release plan. Average velocity and the number of sprints. As mentioned previously, velocity is the rate at which teams work in a given sprint. Average velocity is a mean of 2 or more sprint velocities. For example, a team may work at the rate of 42 points per sprint. Once the team have worked for 3 or 4 sprints, the average velocity can be calculated by dividing the total number of story points completed by the number of sprints taken to complete them. For example, if a team have completed 4 sprints so far, and their velocity at the end of each sprint is as follows: Sprint 1, 10, Sprint 2, 13, Sprint 3, 45, Sprint 4, 48. The average velocity is 10 plus 13 plus 45 plus 48 divided by 4 equal 29 points per sprint. This statistic can be used to forecast how many features are likely to be completed by a release date for date-driven projects, or how long a number of features are likely to take for scope-driven projects. That is, if there are 7 sprints left in the release, then the forecast number of points is 7 times 29 equal 203 points. For a date-driven project, we can pick 203 points worth of stories for the release backlog. For a scope-driven project, we can work out that if the desired scope is 290 points, it will take approximately 290 divided by 29, which equals 10 sprints to deliver. This is a valuable indicator for the Scrum team as well as the whole business. When release planning, it is important to remember 2 things. First, this is an indicator. It is not a team commitment, especially since the velocity can go up or down based on performance. The number of impediments, people pinching, unforeseen defects, and lots of other fun stuff. Secondly, the plan must be updated every sprint to give the business an up-to-date forecast. In my experience, the release plan becomes far more reliable as more sprints are carried out. In addition, the earlier sprints usually encounter more teething problems than others, which reduces early velocity. Release planning and meeting and release backlog. The purpose of the release planning meeting is for the whole Scrum team to agree what they feel is achievable either by the release date or for the release scope. Usually, the Scrum Master or Product Owner will discuss the velocity, number of sprints left, and ultimate release goal with the team. This gives the team an opportunity to advise the Product Owner on any key features, technical or otherwise, left out of the plan, and understand what the aim is. The Product Owner can then communicate to the business knowing that all has been taken into account. There may be some slight or even drastic changes to the plan because of team vacation plans, new ideas, or new information that arises from this meeting. The outcome of the meeting should be that a release backlog that the whole team are focused on delivering is created, and the whole Scrum team should leave with a sense of clarity. Release burndown. Once a plan is made, the release burndown can be used to track release plan progress. The release burndown works on exactly the same principle as the sprint burndown, but, believe it or not, the release burndown is showing the progress in the release as opposed to the sprint. On the y-axis, we are showing the number of story points remaining in the release. On the x-axis, we are showing the number of sprints remaining in the release. As work is completed from sprint to sprint, story points are reduced or burned down. For example, as shown, 400 story points existed at the beginning of the release. In sprint, one of the team managed to complete 30 or so story points. At the end of sprint 2, the remaining story points reduced only slightly more, usually indicating a less than productive sprint, but as mentioned, early sprints are unpredictable. Over time, we can use this to tell us if we're on track for a given release date. For scope-driven projects, this can be used to tell the product owner whether the release is on track to go live on time. I've used the remaining number of story points and average velocity to communicate progress more than a release burndown. Although I think doing that was a worthwhile practice, I have learned that it should never replace such a simpler, clear method of showing progress as the release burndown. I highly recommend using the burndown as a straightforward snapshot of project progress.